I thought it was a romance. Turns out it's a manual on how to raise a maniac. Now my brain won't stop screaming. Help! This psycho is way too good at love.
Trapped in the Phantom of the Opera. Episode 7. Polly was truly angry. Thinking back on everything Erik had done, she almost wanted to laugh in disbelief. So that was why he'd suddenly become so aggressive last night, pretending to be inexperienced, acting reckless and rough, like some distant observer. All of it was a setup. He had planned it out, just to leave a lasting imprint on her. The more Polly thought about it, the more pissed off she got. Ignoring the pain in her palm, she kicked him again. "You don't want me to remember you? You want to traumatize me for life." She kicked him with all her strength, yet he didn't flinch while wrapping her wound. Without even lifting his head, he calmly replied, "Yes." Polly gave a short, incredulous laugh. "You really think I'd be traumatized by your death? What if I end up liking it more?" Erik said nothing. He sprinkled hemostatic powder on her wound, bandaged it, and handed her a capsule of ibuprofen. Polly wasn't as self-destructive as he was. She glared at him and took the pill. That's when she noticed. He was still fully dressed. His white shirt remained buttoned to the collar, the only stain being the blood seeping into the hem of his coat. This man had always been sensitive about his body. Unless she initiated things first, he would never act on desire. So even this was him pushing his own limits just to brand himself in her memory. If her hand didn't hurt so damn much, she might have teased him about it. Thinking about her hand again, Polly couldn't help but kick him one more time. Thankfully, the human body had its own defense mechanisms. Plus, her brain had been flooded with endorphins at the time. She hadn't really felt the pain. But now that she thought about it, he was inhumanly strong. He once decapitated a grown man with just a rope. If he'd really wanted to stab himself, there was no way she could have caught the blade barehanded. Brilliant. He had played her, right to her face. Polly stared at him coldly and said, "Erik, you think I was just trying to cheer you up when I said I liked your face? I meant it. I like your personality too. I even like what you just did, as extreme as it was. Honestly, if you pulled that on anyone normal, no matter how much they liked you, they'd run for the hills." Erik stood silently in front of her, letting her kick and scold him without resistance. His hair fell across one eye, but it couldn't hide the madness and lust still smoldering in his gaze. "You think someone like me is easily threatened?" Polly sneered. "If you really die, I won't feel an ounce of guilt. That's your decision. It has nothing to do with me." Erik abruptly looked up. His Adam's apple bobbed heavily, breath quickening, like her words had lit a fuse. Polly didn't flinch. She stared straight into his eyes. "Whether you die on top of me or inside me, I'll walk away and move on." No sooner had the words left her lips than Erik lunged forward, grabbed the back of her head, and forced her to look up at him. "Then tell me, what the hell am I supposed to do?" As a child, he had always wondered, why did other parents love their children, but his treated him like the devil? Even after being sent to the asylum, surrounded by maniacs, he had clung to hope. He kept believing maybe his parents would come for him. He thought it was his fault for being weak. So he devoured every book he could find, learning everything and anything. "Other than this," he said, staring directly into her eyes, bracing himself against the wall. "Tell me, what else can I do?" There was a time when his entire world was just books, words, and knowledge. He stuffed even the most obscure facts into his brain, hoping knowledge would win his parents' love and make people stop fearing his face. But he failed. His parents abandoned him completely. The world still saw him as a monster, a lunatic, a ticking time bomb. His short life had been filled with absurd prophecies, ramblings from madmen, and bone-deep prejudice, all because of his hideous face. If that were all, he could have accepted it. Just like a starving man who had never known luxury wouldn't crave a feast on his deathbed. But fate made him meet Polly, a blessing and a curse. Now this starving man had tasted paradise. And someone was telling him, she doesn't belong here. One day she'll leave. He had a brilliant mind, unparalleled in intelligence and wisdom. But faced with the idea of losing her, he was utterly powerless. The only thing he could do was carve himself into her memory, deep and permanent, before she left. He didn't fear death. Living only meant continued rejection, exile, and pain. But in death, he could be free of time and space, free to haunt her always. Even if she fled back to her time, as long as she remembered him, he could exist in her mind. He was vile enough to wish she'd think of him during dates with other men, to remember how his breath had scorched her skin, how he held her tight, so tight her bones almost cracked. He knew she wouldn't remember him forever, but even if she remembered him for a second, he could haunt her for that second. He had never been loved, didn't know how to love. From the beginning, he had been hunting her, and this was his final hunt. But in one split second, everything unraveled. Maybe because she had grabbed the blade barehanded. In that instant, he hadn't panicked. He had been euphoric. She had gotten hurt. For him, Erik looked at her, utterly dazed, spilling every thought in his heart. Polly interrupted him several times, trying to talk him down. She had never planned to leave. But the more she spoke, the wilder his eyes grew. His words became more twisted. Polly tried to hold back, but finally she couldn't anymore. She slapped him. Smack! A crisp, loud crack. She didn't hold back, but his head didn't even turn. He just stared at her, wide-eyed, like a rabid dog that couldn't understand human speech. Polly was exhausted. His face, his body, was like stone. She hit him, but she was the one who felt the pain. In the end, she could only mutter helplessly, "Forget it." After all, she had fallen for a madman, and he just happened to be crazy in all the ways that matched her own twisted desires. He craved love, and so did she. They were a perfect, deranged match. But Polly had forgotten. Erik wasn't in a state to understand words. The moment he heard "forget it," his expression turned terrifying. He seized her wrist, his grip ice cold. "What do you mean, forget it?" "Calm down. I meant..." He desperately wanted to hear her explanation, but those two words echoed endlessly in his head until nothing else remained. His eyes went glassy. The madness in his blood roared to life, surging through his veins like thunder. Terror, rage, and grief surged up inside him, overwhelming everything. He saw a vision. It was Polly's world, a world he could never reach. She was the only person in this world who had ever loved him. But once she returned to her time, he would lose her. Forever. She had just said, "Forget it." Forget it? How could he forget it? By the time Polly realized he was on the verge of a breakdown, it was almost too late. She could only sit up and hug him tightly, soothing him like a frightened child. Hey, easy now. I didn't mean it like that." She had never spoken so gently to anyone before, especially not to a man nearly 30 centimeters taller than her. "Even if I accidentally go back," she whispered, "I'll come back for you." Erik said nothing. He buried his face in the curve of her neck. His ears, his throat, flushed crimson. His Adam's apple bobbed, breath chaotic. His breathing was too heavy, too frantic. Each exhale lashed against her ear like a whip. Polly couldn't take it anymore. She gently pushed him back, but that slight movement triggered something primal in him. His predator instinct kicked in. He stared down at her, eyes locked, grabbed both her wrists, and moved in. Everything spiraled into urgency and chaos. From her position, she could see his throat bobbing with repeated swallows, as if thirst had consumed him and instinct was his only guide. The room was stifling. A bead of sweat rolled from his nose and dripped onto her throat. That drowning sensation returned, but this time, he wasn't watching from afar. This time, he was the invader. A storm, crashing down. It wasn't a careful unlocking. It was relentless, violent knocking on the door, over and over again. Eventually, Polly felt like a doll. One moment torn apart by a beast, the next, clung to with the sick devotion of a child. How could one person carry both dependency and destruction? She had always been weak to contrasts. Now she was helpless. Her heart thundered. Blood rushed in reverse. At one point, she remembered a horror movie she'd once seen, where the heroine kept trying to escape, only to be snatched back every time by a lightning-fast killer. The fireplace roared. Polly broke into a sweat, despite the winter chill. Voice hoarse, she croaked, "All right, get off. I need a shower." He didn't answer. He was completely gone. And honestly, it kind of turned her on, especially when he pinned her throat, towering above her. That total domination made her dizzy with desire. He wanted to control her, but couldn't. And the fear of losing control had driven him mad. No one had ever cared about her like this. He was the hunter. She was the prey. But in this warped love, they were evenly matched. Only Erik could give her this terrifying kind of affection. Some would say this wasn't love, too twisted, too dirty, too dangerous. But she loved it anyway. Respectful love had its place, but it wasn't for her. What she wanted was for Erik to hold her so tightly he might crush her bones. Only this kind of brutal love made her feel alive. By the time she finally escaped the killer and reached the bathroom, it was already past midnight. She almost collapsed on the floor. Erik scooped her up and carried her to the bathtub. Polly didn't even have the strength to curse him out. After the bath, she was half dead with exhaustion. Erik seemed calmer now. He lay beside her, head nestled against her neck, breathing steady, and fell asleep. But around 4 or 5 in the morning, she was suddenly jolted awake. In the darkness, his eyes glowed like golden flames. Hair-raising. "I dreamed you left me," he whispered. Polly, eyes barely open, wanted to kick him off the bed. "How many times do I have to say it? Even if I go back, I'll come back for you." But he leaned in and whispered in her ear, words that made her shiver. "If you lie, I'll kill everyone you care about. Polly, then kill yourself first. The person I care about most is you." That finally shut him up. Polly drifted back to sleep. She dreamed she was back at the circus, diligently learning to pick pockets. Trying to please the matron, she scurried through the crowd like a mouse, stealing whatever she could. Wallets, binoculars, watches, rings, thimbles, necklaces, coats, hats. But theft wasn't sustainable. One day she got caught stealing a hat, thrown in jail. Conditions were awful. She caught tuberculosis, died not long after. On the day she died, the other inmates whispered, she wasn't even 17 yet. Normally, people forget their dreams upon waking, but Polly remembered clearly the fear she felt at being caught. A strange chill crawled up her spine. She had a terrible feeling that this was the original host's true ending. If she hadn't transmigrated, the girl whose body she now occupied would have died just like that. But what did the original fate matter? She wasn't a thief. She wasn't jailed. She wouldn't catch TB. Still, was the universe warning her that even though fate had changed, the body's clock was still ticking? Had this life already run its course? Polly's blood ran cold. Erik had gone mad just from the idea of her leaving. She had to tiptoe around him, mixing sweet words with threats, just to calm him down. If she really died and went back to the modern world, with how insane he was, he'd probably turn her corpse into a life-sized figurine. And that might be the least of it. He'd probably go on a killing spree, with no one left to stop him. Polly wasn't sure if that dream had been a coincidence, or some kind of omen. She was an optimistic and determined person. Since she had already arrived in the 19th century, she believed that even if she accidentally returned to the modern world one day, she would find a way to come back. After all, if no passage existed between the two times, how did both she and Jane end up here? The problem was, Erik wouldn't be so optimistic. Thinking back to her earlier worries about whether Erik could protect her, Polly now realized what she should have been worried about was whether he'd kill everyone else. She groaned with a headache. What if she disappeared one day and Erik lost his mind, massacring the entire circus, then hunting down Diana? If she accidentally returned to the modern world, went through hell to come back, and found the entire circus dead, then honestly, she'd rather just stay in the modern world. Out of sight, out of mind. Truth be told, she was uneasy too. What if Jane hadn't returned to the modern era, but just died from an illness? What if dying really just meant death, not time travel? What if she returned to the future and never made it back? Polly had to force herself to push these thoughts aside and focus on the urgent issue at hand. Erik had thrown a wild tantrum last night, but today he seemed calmer. Still, Polly could feel that something in his mental state was off, especially this morning. She had woken up with an odd sensation of swelling, thinking she needed to pee. A few seconds later, she realized he had stayed inside her all night, and somehow fallen asleep like that. Polly's scalp prickled. She elbowed him hard, wanting to kick him off the bed entirely. Erik woke from the blow but said nothing. He just hugged her tighter, pressing his nose against her neck. On the surface, he seemed calm and collected, but there was a predator's persistence to the way he followed some invisible trail deeper and deeper, only releasing her when she was on the verge of exploding. A complete lunatic. Because of that lunatic, Polly shivered on and off all morning while checking progress at the construction site. Her legs felt weak, and that strange swollen feeling still lingered. If he had been there, she would have kicked him again. But she knew he was watching her from somewhere, maybe even from the wall behind her. Like a dragon guarding its treasure, unwilling to look away for a second. She thought of how he used to treat her, cold and indifferent, like a cat toying with a bird. Her life and death were his to decide. Now though, he treated her like she was his life itself. That kind of contrast, she had to admit, it was deeply satisfying. Polly wasn't a vain person, but she could absolutely appreciate the pleasure of having her vanity thoroughly indulged. It was just so damn satisfying. After checking the construction site, Polly did a quick calculation. If things went smoothly, they'd be finished in about a week. Thanks to Erik's guidance, the workers had been lightning fast. She just didn't know if she'd still be here to see it finished. Her mind kept circling back to the same thing. She needed to find some way to restrain Erik in case she vanished unexpectedly. If she disappeared and there was no one to keep him in check, no one would be safe. Even now, the memory of last night's atmosphere made her skin crawl. It was the middle of winter, yet the room had felt like a freshly opened steamer basket. Waves of heat surging in, thick and oppressive. She had felt dizzy, like she was about to pass out. All she could make out was his arm braced beside her, the veins bulging and almost monstrous in their intensity. That was all she could see. He had been too thoroughly dressed, shirt buttoned up to the neck, black coat never taken off. As he moved, the collar of the coat kept brushing against her cheek. She was lucky just to catch a glimpse of his arm. The memory made her itch with curiosity, but going another round, definitely not happening. The priority now was cooling him down, not adding more fuel to the fire. Polly thought for a moment and headed to a jewelry store to buy a few open-ended silver rings. While paying, she turned and walked straight into a firm chest. Erik had appeared behind her at some point, his expression unreadable. Polly blinked in surprise, then casually grabbed his wrist and said to the store owner, "Could you measure his ring size for me?" The owner nodded and fetched a soft measuring tape. Erik said nothing, as Polly pulled off his black leather glove and wrapped the tape around the ring finger of his left hand. After measuring, she didn't let go of his hand. Instead, she continued holding it while browsing the wedding ring designs. The rings were all simple and understated. Polly picked out a plain gold band, paid for it, and slipped it into her pocket. Erik remained silent throughout, his thoughts a mystery. Once outside the shop, Polly took his left hand, slid the gold ring onto his finger, and smiled up at him. "Babe, from now on, you're mine." His ring finger was incredibly long, nearly as long as his middle finger, with faint veins running along it, hinting at tremendous strength beneath the surface. Once the ring was on, it felt as if all that bloody, terrifying energy had been tamed, restrained by this single band of gold. But Erik still didn't speak. Polly teased, "What, you don't want to?" He finally opened his mouth. "What's your real reason for doing this? What else could it be?" Polly smiled, kissed the ring on his finger, and said, "Because I love you." But Erik's eyes bore into her. "You didn't just buy one ring. Who are the silver ones for?" Polly answered honestly, "The circus troupe, of course." He closed his eyes, his breath suddenly uneven. "Will you put a ring on their fingers too, and tell them you love them?" Standing in the street, Polly felt this was not the place to argue. She took his hand and led him to the carriage. Thankfully, they had taken the four-wheeled one today, with a private cabin and curtains. As soon as she stepped in, Erik followed. He slipped his hand into her hair, gripping the back of her head and forcing her to face him. Even though she had just put a wedding ring on his finger, there was no joy in his eyes. From last night to this moment, whether it was pleasure or rage, all the emotions had been Polly's alone. All Erik had felt was fear. He was completely unable to calm down. Any calmness he displayed was purely performative. Inside, he was spiraling, panic fermenting in his chest, swelling like a high-proof liquor, burning holes in his heart, leaving him dizzy, disoriented, muscles trembling. Even in those last few seconds, there had been no pleasure, only deeper, more suffocating terror. She might leave. She would leave. In that moment, he had wanted to physically nail himself to her body, but no one could pin flesh and blood down forever. The moment she slipped that ring onto his finger, the unbearable fear didn't subside. It grew stronger. And then, those other rings. She'd bought several silver bands, all open, ended. She hadn't even measured anyone else's finger size. Who were those for? What was she thinking? Polly saw Erik's ragged breathing and realized he had spiraled again, imagining all sorts of absurd, jealous scenarios until he'd worked himself into a silent fury. She sighed, wrapped her arms around his neck, and kissed him. But he gripped the back of her head and pulled her back. "You still haven't told me. Why are you giving them rings?" She hadn't even gotten to brush her lips against his before being yanked away, and it annoyed her. "What do you think? You even like someone like me," he said hoarsely, completely lost to jealousy. "How do I know you won't like someone else next?" Like a balloon pricked with a needle, Polly felt all her irritation deflate at once. She was left with only exasperation. "You really think any of them compare to you?" Erik just stared, breathing hard, saying nothing. The coachman climbed into his seat and flicked the reins. The carriage began moving toward the villa. Polly patted the spot beside her, inviting Erik to sit down. He stared at her hand for a while, then slowly sat beside her. Despite everything they'd shared, some of his movements still had that wild, untamed animal quality. Polly grabbed his collar and pulled him closer, reaching up to remove his white mask. If he was a wild beast, this action was like sticking her hand straight into its mouth to see if it would bite. But clearly, he was completely tame in her presence. He didn't even blink as the mask came off. His eyes never left hers. Seeing him so obedient made Polly's chest flood with warmth, an aching, tingling heat. She couldn't resist kissing the scarred side of his face and whispered, "You're my only lover. No one compares to you. And I won't fall for anyone else." Somehow, she had ended up on his lap, her chin resting on his shoulder, gently patting his back. "These rings are for Marbell and the others. They've worked for me so long, and I've never given them a proper gift." To any outsider, it was an absurd sight. Erik sat in his knee-length black coat, gleaming leather shoes sharp and elegant, exuding cold dominance. Polly, so much smaller than him, her hand barely half the size of his, looked like a child in her parents' lap. And yet, she was the one comforting him. Only she could calm him down. On the ride home, Polly whispered every sweet word she could think of, until her throat went dry. Erik finally began to settle down, pressing his face into her neck and taking a deep breath. It was the perfect moment. Polly stroked his hair and kissed his earlobe. Then she softly said, "There's something I'd like you to help me with." His voice was cold and hoarse when he replied, "What is it?" "If one day I accidentally disappear," Polly said, "you can't hurt anyone wearing one of those silver rings, because I'll be coming back. I don't want to return and find a pile of corpses. If one day I accidentally disappear." The words echoed like a gong in Erik's skull. His nerves seized up violently. For a moment, it felt like he might snap. A terrifying flood of emotions surged in his chest. Images from his past flashed before his eyes. Torture chambers, scattered limbs, rivers of blood. He used to kill for a living. If she left, how could he not kill? Killing was the only way to ease the panic, to calm his fraying nerves, to silence the chaos in his head. Then, those images shattered. Warm lips touched his. Polly had leaned in and kissed him. She even slipped her tongue inside, softening his tightly clenched jaw, gently wetting his teeth. Her kiss was tender, patient. As their breath mingled, the stabbing pain in his mind dissolved. The stench of blood was replaced by her scent. The urge to kill faded under her kiss. The river of gore disappeared. All that remained was Polly's eyes, so bright, so alive, like a beautiful sharpened blade, cutting away all the rot from his memories. Half an hour later, the carriage arrived at the villa. Polly carefully observed Erik's expression. Once she was sure he had calmed down a bit, she leaned over and gave him another kiss. "If you don't say anything," she smiled, "I'll take it as a yes." Erik replied, "Do I even have the right to refuse?" His face was cold, and the muscles of his arms were sharp and tense as he held her. But his tone carried a hint of grievance. Polly blinked slowly. "Fine, I'll give you the right. Go ahead, refuse me." At her words, a hot breath swept across the side of her neck. Erik lowered his head, pressing his chin against the artery at her throat. They were so close, it almost looked like their necks were intertwined. "You already know I'll never refuse you." As he spoke, his throat vibrated slightly, sending a ticklish shiver across her skin. Polly couldn't help but place her hand against his throat, pushing him slightly away. "You can lie to me, but don't lie to yourself. I told you to get off me so many times this morning. Did you listen to even one of them?" His expression went blank for a second, clearly confused. After a moment, realization dawned. His ears and neck flushed bright red. Truth was, when it happened, he hadn't been thinking at all. He'd moved purely on instinct. He might have had no experience with intimacy, but he wasn't ignorant of the human body. For most of his life, he had viewed people the way a butcher views raw meat. Even when he stood behind Polly last night, slicing open her dress from above, it was with that same butcher's mindset. Seize, take, conquer. Grab the hair, expose the throat, blade to flesh, blood and sweat pouring together. Described like that. Was it any different? And yet, in reality, it was entirely different. He had been born in such a moment, opening his eyes to the fear and disgust in his parents' gaze. But now, returning to that place with Polly, it was suffocating, yet warm. Unfortunately, he was an animal driven half mad by hunger. That tiny bit of warmth could never fill the black hole inside him. When Polly told him to get off, it was like asking a starving, rabid dog to spit out food already in its mouth. It simply wasn't possible. And yet he had whispered, "I'm sorry. I won't do it again." After slapping him across the face, Polly had still offered a sweet date as consolation. She kissed his cheek and helped him put on his mask. "Good boy. Let's go downstairs." Erik hesitated for a second, then pulled open his long black coat and wrapped her inside. With one arm hooked under her knees, he carried her out of the carriage. Polly blinked, but didn't resist. From the living room came laughter and arguments. The circus troupe was already inside the villa. They seemed to be playing cards. Flora, who had terrible luck that day, had lost several rounds and owed a week's worth of chores. She was trying to bribe Mrs. Freeman. "Auntie Freeman, I'll pay you to do the dishes for me, okay? I'm exhausted from dancing every day. I really have no strength left for dishes." "No way," Mrs. Freeman replied. "Miss Clement said it's fine to play cards, but no gambling. The moment money's involved, it changes everything." The moment Polly's name was mentioned, Flora fell silent and resigned herself to a week of washing dishes. The old her would have found that a light task, not even worth mentioning. But ever since meeting Polly, she hadn't touched cold water or greasy dishes in a long time. These days, the most she did was brush the horses or feed them hay. She had to admit, Miss Clement was right. Small stakes didn't make gambling fun, and big stakes weren't allowed. Just then, the front door creaked. Flora cheered and ran over. That had to be Polly. But the figure at the door was the masked man. He was tall, intimidatingly tall. Standing with his back to the light, even his shadow sent chills down her spine. The moment her gaze met the dark holes of his mask, Flora's entire body tensed. Her gut twisted like a wrung-out towel. Then she noticed there was something bundled in his black coat. It looked like a person. Her breath hitched. Goosebumps covered her arms. Was he carrying a corpse? Why would he bring a body back to the villa? Was he trying to frame Miss Clement? The heat from Erik's body radiated outward. After just a few minutes inside his coat, Polly couldn't take it anymore and poked her head out to breathe. She spotted Flora standing there and blushed deeply, like a parent caught making out by their child. "Darling, what's wrong? You look pale." Only after seeing Polly did Flora finally exhale, warmth returning to her frozen limbs. She opened her mouth to speak, but, meeting Erik's icy stare, shivered violently and ran off. Polly looked up at Erik and sighed. Erik bent down and set her gently on the ground, pulling on a black leather glove with his left hand. "You called her darling. You're my darling too." Calmly he said, "Don't call anyone else that when I'm around." "Why?" "I don't want to kill them and make you mad." It was clear that not killing them wasn't the main concern. Her reaction was. Polly sighed. "If you really did kill them, I'd be more than just angry." He didn't argue, but his eyes turned colder, a silent warning. "Say one more word about how important these people are, and I'll start the slaughter now." Polly had originally wanted to say, "They're not a threat to you." She had no romantic interest in any of them, much less physical intimacy. But that wasn't the point for Erik. His mind didn't operate like a normal person's. Most people's possessiveness was limited to jealousy over other men. Erik rejected all living creatures. Anything that got near her sparked an urge to kill. It wasn't personal. He would have looked at a stray dog the same way if she stared too long. It was a sickness, and it wasn't going away anytime soon. Polly thought for a moment, then reached up, grabbed his collar, and kissed him. "Calm the beast first." The living room had gone completely silent. The moment Erik entered, all conversation ceased. No one dared speak. Only when Polly walked in did the mood thaw a little. She chatted with them briefly, then opened her handbag. "Come pick up your gifts." Everyone exchanged glances. Not a single soul dared approach. Erik stood right behind her, tall and icy, clinging to her like a ghost. So Polly had to walk over and hand out the rings herself. Finally, Theodore broke the silence. "Miss Clement, why are you giving us silver rings?" Polly smiled. "Because I hope we'll always be a family. Honestly, I'm not some incredibly talented person. The circus's success isn't mine alone. Without your trust and cooperation, I probably wouldn't have made it past our debut show." She looked around the room. "I know I'm currently a bit of a public figure. Plenty of people have tried to bribe you for dirt on me. Some even offered $500. But you turned them down without even haggling. That kind of loyalty means the world to me." No one spoke. Something about her words felt off, like a farewell speech instead of a thank you. Polly paused, then added, "The reason I'm giving you these rings is, if one day I'm gone and can't manage the circus anymore, I need you to follow Erik's orders." "No," Flora cried, only to have Marbell clamp a hand over her mouth and drag her behind the couch. Emily said, "Miss Clement, is something wrong?" "If it's about money," Rivers suddenly spoke, "I can help." Everyone turned to look at him. He shrugged. "What? I love it here. I don't want the circus to fall apart. I saved $4 or $5 grand from my lawyer days in New York. If you need it, it's yours." Theodore added, "I've got some saved too. Not as much as Rivers, but I'd like to help." Erik watched coldly. His breathing grew heavier. His jaw trembled, like a beast barely holding it together. It was clear now Polly didn't belong to him alone. She was the center of this place, the emotional pillar of everyone here. They all bask in her warmth. The idea of her leaving had them all in a panic. Understandably so. They were people abandoned by the world, just like him. It was only because of Polly that they had anything at all. Marbell had lymphedema in her legs, branded a freak. Thanks to Polly, she was known in New Orleans, even featured in newspapers. Agents regularly offered her contracts. Emily had once been trapped in darkness. Born with 4 legs, her unborn fetus made into a grotesque museum display. Polly helped her realize it wasn't weakness that made her suffer. Even so-called gentlemen couldn't bear to look at what had been done to her. Flora, once mocked as a lizard girl, had become a ballerina. Thorne, Theodore, Rivers. Without Polly, Thorne, simple and timid, would have remained just another elephant man, always in someone else's shadow. Theodore was tall, but that was it. When his gigantism worsened, his end would have been even more tragic. Rivers, once a disgraced second-rate lawyer in New York, would have spent his life drafting wills and chasing debt in New Orleans. He was no different from the rest of them. Polly loved him now. But who would she love next? Maybe Theodore. Erik's thoughts darkened. The way Theodore looked at her made his skin crawl, and Polly had never once scolded him. Maybe she had been planning to be with Theodore all along. Erik shut his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew these thoughts were irrational, disconnected from reality, but he couldn't stop. His jealousy was uncontrollable. Even if Polly crawled inside his body, shared his organs and blood, he would still be jealous of his own internal organs. Suddenly, Polly took his left hand. It felt like a cool breeze blew through his fevered mind. For a moment, the madness lifted. She raised his hand, kissed the leather glove, then turned to the room and said, "You're all overthinking. I told you to listen to Erik not just because he's a co-owner and designed many of our secret mechanisms." She smiled, "but also because he's my husband." The living room fell into complete silence. Everyone was too shocked to speak. They had long suspected something ambiguous was going on between Polly and Erik. Sometimes Erik would emerge from Polly's bedroom with a faint reddish mark on his neck, clearly the result of a forceful kiss. But anyone with eyes could tell the two of them were wildly mismatched. Polly was beautiful and wealthy. She could have easily presented herself as a well-bred heiress, crossed the ocean to France, and married a young nobleman. After all, plenty of noblemen were drowning in debt, desperately in need of a rich dowry to save them. With a title in hand, she would no longer be the scandalous Miss Clement, but a respected lady of the aristocracy. And yet, she chose to marry Erik. Erik looked like a cold, aristocratic gentleman. He dressed impeccably and expensively, but wore a mask like a fugitive, and under his long black coat, the bulges of gun holsters and ropes could sometimes be seen. What kind of normal person carried so many deadly weapons? Everyone wanted to say something, but held their tongues. It seemed like Polly had been tricked by Erik, but they were used to trusting her unconditionally. In fact, Polly's judgment had never failed them. If she were so easily deceived, the circus wouldn't have survived this long, and none of them would be so fiercely loyal to her. So they let it go. If Polly made this choice, she must have her reasons. They would believe in her, first and always. Polly knew it would be hard for everyone to accept Erik so quickly, so she began by briefly explaining the hidden mechanisms and secret doors he had designed. Then she said, "Emily, Theodore, do you remember the day Henry Jensen passed out from fright?" Emily and Theodore exchanged glances. Of course, they remembered. Henry Jensen was that arrogant, dismissive policeman who had sneered at their performance. It had been their first time performing together. If Henry hadn't fainted from fright, they might never have had the confidence to face those three gentlemen afterward. Polly said, "Remember what I told you before you went on stage. Just perform. Someone will be there to help you." Theodore looked stunned. "You don't mean—" "I do." Polly smiled. "It was Erik. He joined the circus before any of you. He's just not very social, so I never introduced him." Suddenly, Emily realized why the name Erik sounded so familiar. She had met someone by that name at her last circus too. A teenage prodigy who also wore a mask. His eyes had been cold and hollow, utterly devoid of emotion, so eerily inhuman it felt like he could slaughter the entire troupe at any moment. Emily subtly glanced at the man standing beside Polly. After a moment's hesitation, she was certain it was the same person. Compared to that emotionless prodigy from before, the man before her seemed more human. Suddenly, Erik met her gaze. It felt like her heart dropped into a frozen lake. Emily froze completely, cold sweat erupting down her spine. In that moment, she felt like a prey animal caught in the sights of a predator. Instinctively, she played dead, her breathing shallow, her body paralyzed. Polly must have noticed the tension. She reached over and gently took Erik's hand, then kissed the gold wedding band on his left ring finger. Erik turned his gaze away. Instantly, the crushing pressure disappeared. Emily's hair was soaked with sweat. Her forelegs trembled uncontrollably, but finally, she could breathe again. Polly let out a small sigh of helplessness. All it took was a kiss on Erik's finger after each sentence to keep the situation under control. Thanks to her efforts, the handover ceremony was acceptable. The circus members silently accepted Erik as second in command. Still, Polly could see their nervous faces, their forced smiles. Most of them were drenched in cold sweat. She quickly grabbed Erik and led him away. Back in the bedroom, Polly sighed deeply. She wasn't sure if Erik would ever be able to get along with them once she was gone. Honestly, it didn't look promising. Just then, a shadow loomed overhead. Erik stood beside her, gazing down. He slowly peeled off his black leather glove, revealing the plain gold band on his ring finger. Out of nowhere, he said, "You did it on purpose." Polly had seen him take off his gloves before, but somehow, her eyes were still drawn to the sight of his long, defined fingers. It took a while before she managed to tear her gaze away. "You gave me a gold ring," he said calmly, "but gave them silver ones. You were testing me, to see how far I'd go for you." Polly burst out laughing. "I didn't give you a gold ring. I gave you a wedding ring, you fool." Erik said nothing. He raised her chin, pressed his lips to hers, forced her mouth open, and swallowed her breath and saliva with his tongue. When she had announced him as her husband, he had nearly been consumed by a seizure of joy, so overwhelmed he could barely think. But very quickly, something had felt off. Why rings? Out of all the gifts she could have given, why rings for them? With his genius-level intellect, Erik could solve almost any problem when he focused, except when it came to Polly. It wasn't until they returned to the bedroom that he realized she had done it intentionally. She was testing how he felt about the others, testing how much influence she had over him, whether he'd suppress his urge to kill just because she said so. If anyone else had dared test him like that, he would have killed them on the spot. That was his bottom line. He despised being manipulated, hated when people thought they could control him. But when it was Polly, he barely felt anything. only a desire to earn a reward elsewhere. If she wanted him to follow orders without question, she'd have to submit to him in other ways. Polly saw him pulling a strip of black silk from his coat and quickly said, "Wait!" Erik paused. "You don't want to?" "No," she said innocently. "I want to see you." "There's nothing to see." He turned his head away, voice cold. Polly shook her head, stood up, grabbed his hand, and pushed him onto the bed. What she hadn't seen last time, she wanted to see clearly this time. She straddled his knees and reached up to remove his white mask, revealing the disfigured side of his face. Though he didn't flinch under her gaze, his hand clenched into a fist. Veins bulged on the back of his hand, his reaction instant, almost like a reflex. Polly leaned in close and whispered in his ear, "I love looking at your face. Why won't you let me?" He closed his eyes, his Adam's apple bobbing. A thick vein stood out on his neck. Polly kissed the side of his throat. The next moment, her wrist was grabbed. At some point, he had opened his eyes and was staring at her, his other hand gripping her jaw, forcing her to look at him. "You really like looking at my face?" he asked. "I really do." "Then look," he said. At first, Polly was confused by what he meant. Erik didn't explain. Instead, he got up and lit the fireplace, stoking the flames and hanging her nightgown nearby to warm. He had done the same thing last time, preparing everything in advance, including hot water for her bath, so that she'd have warm clothes ready the moment she stepped out, with no chance of catching a cold. Polly watched his movements, unsure what he was planning. Then he took off his coat and gloves, tossed them aside, and went to wash his hands. By the time she finally understood what he meant by then, look, it was already too late. The fire crackled. The room grew stuffy, the heat overwhelming, making her feel lightheaded. Sweat beaded on her forehead, threatening to drip into her eyes. She instinctively closed them, but a hand lifted her chin and commanded, "Open your eyes." She had no choice but to keep them open. And what she saw, he was more twisted than usual, more insane, but also more perfectly in tune with her desires. He stared straight into her eyes with terrifying intensity. If she hadn't seen it herself, she never would have believed that one person could love another that much. Even just meeting his gaze filled her with unease. Suddenly, he leaned closer, his nose brushing hers. Their breath mingled. Then he moved lower. At that angle, she could almost see him. But not quite. Maybe it was the suffocating heat of the room. Time felt like it slowed to a crawl. She felt like she was lying under a blazing sun, every nerve ending burning, the blood in her veins boiling, ready to evaporate. Her eyes misted over, and then a flood broke loose. At that exact moment, a soft rain began to fall outside. Droplets clung to the window like condensation, damp, hot, and thick with something almost filthy. The air was suffocating. Polly could barely breathe. She kicked Erik and told him to open a window. Cool, fresh air rushed in. Rain blew through the room. When Erik returned, she noticed his white shirt was soaked. His lips, jaw, and throat were slick with moisture. His shirt was spattered with wet patches. Some of it was rain. The rest? Polly's ears burned red. She told him to go shower. Instead, he reached out and cupped her jaw. His long fingers were wet and sticky with something. Polly wasn't easily embarrassed, but her ears felt like they were on fire. Erik stared at her, unmoving. Then he dipped his thumb into the moisture on his throat and wiped it across the disfigured side of his face. Polly's breath caught. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. The window was open. Cold wind filled the room. One side was damp and chill, the other dry and burning. The tension only grew thicker. Then Erik tilted his head slightly, opened his mouth, and licked the pad of his thumb. Polly's heart nearly stopped. He was clearly not as composed as he pretended to be. His ears were scarlet, but the thought that this was her scent, left by her touch, he savored it like honey. "If you like it," he said softly, staring at her. "I can do this every day." Polly. Who on earth could resist this? His soaked white shirt clung to his body, outlining his firm, symmetrical chest muscles. His abs and veins faintly showed through the damp fabric. "Polly, go take a shower, sweetheart." After much coaxing, he finally agreed. Polly climbed out of bed and slipped into the nightgown that had been warming by the fire. Since they had become a couple, it was always Erik who washed her clothes. Dresses, petticoats, bloomers, stockings, gloves, even her corsets. He hand-washed each item meticulously, dried them, and hung them by the fireplace to warm. Polly was never patient with laundry. Before she hired Mrs. Freeman, she just tossed her clothes to the public laundry. But laundresses there washed everything together, men's and women's garments, rough cotton and delicate silk, all soaked in bleach and returned reeking of chemicals. Clothes washed by Erik, on the other hand, smelled of nothing but cleanliness. Every time Polly changed into the clothes he had washed, her feelings were complicated. Aside from the initial embarrassment, she had hardly faced any real difficulties since arriving in the 19th century, and that was largely thanks to Erik. He took care of her so thoroughly it bordered on obsession. In humid New Orleans, where bugs ran rampant, he frequently dismantled her bed to check the wooden joints for insects. He even washed her shoes by hand and dried them beside the fire. Each morning, he would reach into the folds of her dress by the hearth to check if it was still damp. Even in the modern world, Polly had never been that meticulous. Once clothes felt dry to the touch, she stuffed them into the closet without a second thought. He even adjusted his meals for her. Erik had no particular food preferences. What he ate was more akin to sustenance than cuisine. Once Polly realized this, she started feeding him deliberately. His own homemade red wine beef stew, seared steaks, crawfish he caught himself. Sometimes she'd even wrap fruit in crepes and coax him to eat it. He had little appetite, but whatever she offered, he'd usually eat. He also finished off whatever she left behind. As a result, Polly had almost never seen food spoil in this house. There was always something new and delicious on the table. She had tried to take care of him too, but somehow it always ended with him taking care of her instead. Aside from his lack of experience in physical intimacy, there wasn't anything he needed her guidance for. Despite their age gap, she was always the one being cared for. All Polly could do was feel equal parts ashamed and spoiled. As days passed, life gradually returned to its quiet rhythm. Erik's mood stabilized as well. He was no longer volatile, though he never stopped watching her. She still remembered when they first met, how much he hated mirrors. He never kept reflective objects nearby. Even his dagger blades were frosted to avoid showing reflections. Now, however, she caught his gaze in every polished surface. On the lacquered wardrobe, the glass door of the bookshelf, the glossy sheen of a porcelain dish. His eyes were everywhere, like shadows that clung to her. Every mirror in the house, every piece of glass, even the reflection in a cup of water, had become a tool for him to watch her. Polly wasn't sure if this was a good or bad thing. Probably good. At least he no longer avoided his reflection. Sometimes, when she teased him, he would even carry her to the mirror. The fireplace in their room always blazed warmly. The mirror above it was constantly fogged with steam. When she breathed near it, the mist thickened. But he would calmly press a hand to the back of her neck, wipe the mirror clear, and whisper in her ear, "Open your eyes." Another week passed. The apartment was finally complete, and the top floor rooms were decorated exactly to Polly's vision. That's when Polly realized Erik seemed to have grown taller again. Damn that horror movie director. Why did he design him to be this tall? Then again, it wasn't unique to him. In many horror franchises, the villains started out average height in the first film, but by the sequels, the directors always made them taller, some even reaching over 2 meters. Polly silently prayed he'd stop growing. The size difference was getting out of hand. For some reason, whenever she thought of the horror version of the Phantom of the Opera, she felt an odd kind of dissonance. It was like the movie was one thing, but real life was another. Now, she was living in the life, not the film. That had been a story. But this was the most thrilling chapter of her life, and it was slowly turning into something gentle and enduring. That morning, Polly woke up early. The grand opening of their new haunted house was scheduled for that afternoon. She took off her pajamas, but hadn't yet changed into the new dress when her hand was suddenly grabbed. She turned around and met Erik's golden eyes. Even after all this time, his love still burned as fiercely as it did in the early days. He couldn't stop looking at her, touching her. Nothing was ever enough. Of course, she got dragged right back into bed. The new dress accidentally got caught in the fray and ended up a mess, completely unwearable. Well, she couldn't blame him entirely. Polly was never passive in this. Whenever she made the first move, he'd go utterly feral, like a predator sinking its teeth into prey's throat, refusing to let go until blood gushed from the wound. By the time the beast finally sheathed its claws, it was nearly noon. Polly, freshly showered, stared at the ruined dress in frustration. What am I supposed to wear now? Erik was already fully dressed, adjusting his cufflinks. He glanced at her and said coolly, "Didn't Mitter send you a dress?" Polly froze. "Mitter? Who's that?" "You were going to sue him," Erik said mildly. "Forgot?" "Oh," Polly vaguely recalled. Mitter was one of the 3 gentlemen who had argued with her in the papers and even tried to pursue her. "He sent me a dress?" Erik paused, then walked over to the wardrobe and pulled out a light green gown. The moment she saw it, Polly remembered everything. Back then, to bait Erik, she had pretended to accept Mitter's invitation to dinner. The next day, she received a gift box with this pale green dress and a note. This shade was dyed with gardenia and indigo, non-toxic. Even with her eyes closed, Polly could tell. This dress was from Erik. No way Mitter had been that thoughtful. She had wanted to call him out on it right away. But she changed her mind, fluttered her lashes, and smiled with delight. "You have such a good memory. I almost forgot about this dress." Erik's hand clenched tightly around the gown. Polly walked over, took the dress from him, and held it up to herself. "I wonder how Mitter managed this. Plant dyes usually fade fast, but this green stayed vibrant all this time." Erik stared at her, then said, "Aren't you afraid he laced it with arsenic?" Polly blinked. This light a shade could still contain arsenic? Who knows? He stepped closer, pressed his hand to her shoulder, and gently rubbed her shoulder blade with his thumb. "If I were Mitter and knew I wasn't worthy of you, maybe I'd mix arsenic into the lining. Make your skin blister and rot so you could never step outside again." Polly. If she hadn't seen how much he cherished her these days, he wouldn't even let her tie her own shoes. She might have believed him. She couldn't help it anymore and burst into laughter. "You fool, I know you sent it." Erik fell silent. Polly turned around, wrapped her arms around his neck, and kissed him. "Who else would treat me this well but you?" Still silent, Erik's thumb and forefinger slid to the tie at the back of her nightgown. Before Polly realized what was happening, the green dress was soiled, worse than the last one, nearly unrecognizable. With the opening ceremony just hours away, she had no time to dwell on her aching legs. She grabbed a white velvet dress, threw on a coat, and snapped at Erik, "Carry me downstairs." By the time they arrived at the Royal Street apartment, the haunted house had already opened. Once again, Polly was reminded that good looks were a dangerous distraction. Luckily, the circus crew had grown capable enough to manage on their own. Even without her or Erik present, they still scared the guests into screaming fits. With nothing to do, Polly wandered the city arm in arm with Erik. His physique was far too striking, half his face cold and angular, the other hidden behind a white mask. Passers-by kept turning to look. She felt the muscles in his arms suddenly tense, like he might slaughter everyone on the street and bathe it in blood. Polly quickly grabbed his neck and kissed his cheek. Immediately, his muscles relaxed. He returned to calm. Polly realized, with a thrill, that she was enjoying this power over him. Maybe that's why people who lived with beasts could never leave them. Because the feeling was intoxicating. Only you can tame him. Only you can calm him. Call it a flaw. Call it some secret corner of human desire. But the way he depended on her, trusted her absolutely, it was addictively satisfying. Back at home, Polly was thrilled to receive a reply from Tesla. The letter said the generator had passed all tests and would be delivered soon. Excited by the idea of finally having access to her phone, Polly planned to make Erik watch a movie with her that evening. Though he never said so outright, she could tell it bothered him, that he couldn't imagine what her world looked like. Luckily, she had several movies downloaded on her phone, and a power bank in her bag. That should be enough to get through a film. After dinner, she stopped Erik from washing the dishes, dragged him to the bed, and turned on her phone in front of him. "Let's watch a movie." He paused. "Movie?" Polly suddenly remembered. The world's first film had already been made by now, but the concept of movies hadn't caught on yet. It wouldn't be another 7 years before the Lumiere brothers held the first public screening. So she gave him a quick rundown of how movies worked and said cheerfully, "Someday, we'll go to Paris and watch one together." Erik stared at her phone and gave a quiet, She opened the streaming app, only to realize she had downloaded nothing but horror movies. Not a single proper romance in sight. She broke into a cold sweat. After some hesitation, she picked a horror flick from Netflix and hit play. Her phone's audio was surprisingly good. No external speakers, yet the stereo effect was powerful. The film opened with the usual animated logos of production companies, something Polly had seen 1,000 times. But Erik watched them, entranced. Ominous, eerie music began. The credits rolled in an old film reel style, complete with vintage noise and flickering dust specks. The shot zoomed out, revealing an old TV playing the news. Polly quickly explained, "That's a television. I think it was invented about 30 years after this." "I don't remember exactly." Erik was quiet for a moment. "So this little thing in your hand is a television?" He pronounced television perfectly, though his tone revealed his confusion. Polly tried to clarify. "Well, imagine going from cavemen to agriculture. That took hundreds of thousands of years. But from the first telephone to this thing in my hand, just over 100. Scientists call it the technology explosion. Only the word explosion can capture how fast it all happened." He nodded, seeming to grasp the concept. Polly continued, "This is called a cell phone. It started as a portable telephone, but evolved into a multifunctional device. You can even watch movies on it." Erik didn't respond. Too many new things had flooded into his mind at once. He couldn't process them all. On screen, the heroine and her friends were driving to a remote town. It was hot, so the actresses wore short-sleeved shirts and shorts. When the camera cut to a wide shot and showed the women's outfits, Erik instantly closed his eyes and turned his head away. Polly laughed and nuzzled his cheek. "Silly. That's perfectly normal where I come from." He kept his eyes shut, voice unreadable. "I suspected for a long time. You must have come from a very open place." Seeing he still wouldn't open his eyes, Polly decided to preserve his precious chastity and skipped ahead in the movie. Honestly, horror films were mostly jump scares and gore. The plot was usually secondary. Eventually, they finished the film. Polly thought, "I should have downloaded more rom-coms." Still, the most exciting part had been the scene where the chainsaw-wielding maniac massacres a bus full of people. Since arriving in the 19th century, Polly hadn't experienced such intense visuals in a long time. She sighed with satisfaction. Finally, a proper thrill. Then a hand cupped her chin and turned her face. Erik stared at her for a moment, then asked coldly, "You got excited because of the murder scenes?" Crap. He noticed. Polly, worried he'd say I can do better, quickly hugged his neck and kissed him. "Of course not. It's because of you." He swallowed the rest of her words with his mouth. Whether the movie had riled him up or not, his gaze was intense, icy, brutal, borderline unhinged. The phone screen didn't go dark. It automatically started playing the next film in the queue. Amid the sound of a brass bed frame crashing into the wall, the title sequence began. The Paris Opera House. The heroine rehearsing. And then, things began to go wrong. Polly remembered nothing after that. Her mind shattered like glass. Her only coherent thought, the phone battery, is dying. Eventually, Erik carried her to the bathroom, washed her clean, dressed her in fresh pajamas, and tucked her into bed. She slept deeply. Too deeply. So deeply it scared her. She had never slept that hard in her life. It felt like she was dead. In fact, she stopped breathing for a few seconds. Everything went silent. Even the internal hum of her heartbeat and organs faded. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw the ceiling of a car. She was in a moving vehicle. Why was she in a car? A friend glanced at her in the rearview mirror and teased, "Damn, you slept like a rock. 2, maybe 3 hours. I tried to wake you, nothing worked. What, were you out robbing houses last night?" Polly shut her eyes tightly. Her heart lurched with a sudden sense of freefall, like she was plummeting in a dream. It took her a long moment before she looked down at her own hand. And in that instant of recognition, the falling sensation grew worse, like tumbling from a great height. It was her own hand. She was back. In the few months she'd spent away, Claremont's hands had been carefully cared for, no longer as rough as they were when she first arrived in the 19th century. The thick calluses had gradually worn away, leaving the skin smooth and soft. Unless you touched it, you'd hardly notice the hands had ever been so hardened. But still, the 19th century lacked proper skincare. No matter how much she tried, they couldn't match the delicate hands she had been born with. Polly's own hands were stunning. Clean, rosy nails, soft, pale skin, elegantly shaped knuckles. When she first time traveled, she dreamed of those hands constantly. Later, as she got used to Claremont's body, she couldn't even clearly remember what her original hands had looked like. Now, seeing them again, her feelings were all over the place. Relief and sadness tangled together. She was overjoyed to be back in her own body. but heartbroken that it had to be now. She rubbed her temples, a headache coming on. Her friend, noticing how spaced out she looked, asked casually, "Did you drink or something?" Polly's voice was hoarse. "No. Your phone's vibrating." Only then did Polly remember. She was back in the modern world, and she had her phone again. Modern people never let go of their phones, no matter where they went. But after months away, seeing the incoming call screen again felt almost alien, like seeing a stranger's hand during her first-time travel jump. She took a deep breath and answered. "Hello?" A cheerful male voice responded, "Lily, why is no one at your house?" Polly frowned. "Who is this?" "Davis," the man replied in a teasing tone. "Don't tell me you forgot already?" The name Davis made her bristle. It was the same name as one of those 3 arrogant men who attacked her in the papers. But after a pause, she remembered, before time traveling, she also knew a Davis, a guy she met through a stage play, clean cut, a charming college student. They'd gone on 2 dates before he started hinting at wanting to take things further. Polly had turned him down gently, but he wouldn't let it go. He even stalked her, showing up at her door uninvited. A guy like that? One look at Erik's rope collection, and he'd behave real quick. But Erik wasn't here anymore. Polly closed her eyes, forcing down the stabbing pain in her chest. When she opened them again, her gaze was icy and clear. "If you harass me again," she said flatly, "I'll report you for sexual harassment. I remember you're still in school, right?" The other end of the line went dead. Polly wasn't done. She called back. He hung up again. She called a 3rd time. He blocked her. As an unknown actress, Polly usually avoided confrontations like this. She didn't want to give anyone an excuse to smear her reputation. She'd always been diplomatic, letting people save face while giving herself a graceful exit. But now, she woke up to find her lover gone, her career gone. She was restless, full of a low-burning rage. That's when she realized, just as she could affect Erik's emotions, he could affect hers too. She had overestimated her rationality. Thankfully, she had anticipated this moment. She had said what needed to be said, made the arrangements that needed making. When Erik woke up to find her dead, it wouldn't be a shock. Suddenly, her friend's voice came from the driver's seat. "Lily, did you land a new role or something?" "Huh? Nothing. It's just your accent sounds funny. Like something out of the Gilded Age." Polly! Only then did she realize her accent had changed. Damn. She needed to fix that quickly, or she'd sound like someone doing a bad impression of the Queen, drawing all kinds of stares. That whole day, she was a beat off. Every sentence she spoke had to be carefully chosen to avoid slipping into the overly dramatic tone of the 19th century. They had originally planned to go camping for 2 or 3 days, but her friend noticed her bad mood and lack of enthusiasm, and brought her home the next day. Polly felt guilty and offered to buy her friend dinner. Afterward, she went home, collapsed onto her bed, and closed her eyes. It reminded her of when she first got accepted to college. She had excitedly messaged her parents to share the good news, but received nothing in return. A whole month later, they finally sent one word: congratulations. They hadn't even asked how she was paying tuition. She was still saddled with student debt because of that. The memory was so unpleasant she had repressed it. That whole phase of her life was a blur. People tend to forget painful things. It's the mind's way of protecting itself, so it doesn't get crushed under wave after wave of depression. She had nearly forgotten just how lonely she used to be. No wonder she had thrown herself into fictional worlds. After lying there for a long time, Polly suddenly sat up, walked to her desk, and opened her laptop. She searched for Nikola Tesla. She didn't expect anything. But the moment she hit enter, her eyes flew wide open. Holy crap. She clearly remembered the Niagara power plant being built after 1895. But Wikipedia said it was 1893. 2 years earlier. Polly's heart pounded. She kept reading. In 1888, Edison, desperate to win the war of currents, lobbied the state of New York to replace hanging with the electric chair, hoping to associate Tesla's alternating current with death. He even hired people to electrocute cats and dogs to scare the public. But because Tesla had already invented the alternating current plug and adapted it for existing appliances, Edison's smear campaign failed. He lost the war. Though Tesla never patented the plug, he did publish letters in the New York Times in 1889, crediting a Miss C from her hometown for the inspiration. Polly stared at the screen. Miss C. She felt like lightning had struck her. The letters she had written to Tesla just to charge her phone had ended up changing history. And not just in some alternate timeline. She had changed her own past. Of course, no invention is born in a vacuum. True progress stands on the shoulders of others. Harvey Hubble, the man who would later invent the modern plug, hadn't been harmed by Tesla's early design. In fact, he invented the three-prong version even earlier. Still, Polly broke out in a cold sweat. She had assumed time travel would trigger a butterfly effect and split off a new timeline. She hadn't expected to alter her own reality. The moment she went back, she had to find Harvey Hubble and return the patent to him. But how was she supposed to go back? Both of her time travel jumps had been tied to watching horror movies. Did she just need to watch another one? She picked up her laptop, curled into bed, and opened a horror film. It didn't work. The movies that used to help her escape reality now felt bland and lifeless. Maybe it was because her real-life experience had been far more dramatic than any horror film. She watched one movie, then another. While the opening credits played, she picked up her phone and searched. Polly Clement. To her shock, she found something. A Wikipedia page. Her scalp tingled. Her palms began to sweat. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the screen. No photo, just an oil painting that bore about 40% resemblance to her. Name: Polly Clement. Date of birth: unknown. Date of death: February 23, 1889. Bio: Polly Clement, a female entrepreneur of unknown nationality, arrived in New Orleans, Louisiana, in October 1888. She founded the famous Miss Claremont's Circus. Unlike other circuses, hers was known for its haunted house shows, making it the first historically recorded haunted house performance. In November 1888, Clermont sued Walter Mitter for defamation of character. This was the first recorded case of a woman suing a man, and it caused a sensation. After her death, the case continued. Her legal representative, Steve Rivers, ultimately won the case on her behalf. At that moment, Polly couldn't describe how she felt. Only now did she truly believe she had really traveled to the 19th century. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. She had existed. And that was enough. If she had returned once, she could return again. There had to be some kind of passage between the eras. She just hadn't found it yet. She watched a few more horror movies. Still no luck. Thinking about how both jumps had been linked to a horror version of The Phantom of the Opera, she searched online for that specific version. To her horror, she found nothing. No record, no streaming link. That movie had been filmed in the 1970s, well before exclusivity deals. Every video platform should have had it. But nothing. Not even in her viewing history. She rummaged through her hiking backpack for a backup phone, powered it on, checked the downloads. Nothing there either. The musical version was still available. But when she forced herself to sit through it, nothing happened. By the end, she was drenched in sweat. Her stomach felt like a block of ice sinking deeper and deeper. Why? The whole thing felt absurd. It reminded her of those early days at the circus, when the old woman beat her with a cane and she felt utterly hopeless. What had she told herself back then? Stay calm. Don't panic. Don't give up. She thought about the Wikipedia entry. Not just a few lines, but they meant she had mattered. Rivers had even won her case after her death. Only they knew how difficult that must have been. She had to pull herself together and find a way back. Over the next month, Polly alternated between film sets and the library, digging for anything related to time travel. And what she found shocked her. There were so many unsolved historical mysteries linked to time travel. For instance, in 1961, a document called the Sibiu manuscript was discovered, dated back to the 16th century. It contained diagrams for cannons, ballistics, even rockets. It proposed concepts like spacecraft, rocket fuel, liquid propulsion, and delta wings, centuries ahead of their time. Concepts that wouldn't be realized until the Apollo program. No one knew how the author had come by this knowledge. Genius. Or time traveler? Even in religious texts, the idea of time travel appeared. The most famous story was of the 7 sleepers, who were hidden in a cave by God and awoke centuries later. Strangely, the same story appeared in the Quran, but in the end, all these stories were just mysteries. No matter how deeply she investigated, there were no answers. Half a month later, Polly took a long-shot gamble and started a social media account, posting about her time travel experience. Her details matched historical records, and her resemblance to the portrait sparked a minor buzz. Some said she wasn't a time traveler, just someone awakening memories of a past life. Others accused her of being a third-rate writer, inventing a sloppy story. Then one comment caught her eye. "You dare impersonate Polly Clement? Do you even know how she ended up?" It was tragic. After her burial, someone dug up her coffin and stole her remains. Think about it. How conservative the American South was. Back then, for locals to desecrate her grave, she must have seriously pissed them off. Besides, she wasn't some saint. She was calculating, ruthless, even turned a serial killer's house into a haunted attraction. Honestly, she deserved it. Polly. She tuned out the judgment because her mind was stuck on one thought. Holy crap. Erik dug up her grave. Just like Diana said, Polly had simply gone to sleep and never opened her eyes again. Erik sat beside her, gently brushing her eyelashes with one finger. As if she might blink awake, snuggle into his neck, and whisper sleepily in his ear, "Let me rest a little longer." But it was just his imagination. She never reacted. She would never open her eyes again. And yet, for some reason, Erik felt no panic, only a quiet stillness and a deep fatigue. It was like this moment had always been inevitable, just a matter of time. After all, she promised she would come back. All he had to do was wait. Erik had never been this calm. Every emotion, anxiety, dread, rage, obsession, had vanished. When she was with him, he had felt constantly on edge. 1 second out of her sight, and he'd spiral into panic. It was as if their nervous systems were tangled together. Distance between them was like ripping skin apart. But now, with her body lying right there, he felt strangely at peace. Until the freaks, those circus performers, dared to bury her. That's when it hit him. He could never touch her again. In that moment, it felt like his nerves were snapping. One by one, his temples pounded. Dizziness took over. His chest tightened. Rational thought crumbled. Rage boiled in him, stabbing his chest like a dagger, trying to split him in half. He wanted to kill. The one who bought the coffin. The one who gave the eulogy. The one who filled in the grave. He wanted to kill them all. At the height of his rage, he had already dressed, gloves on, ready to rip off their heads with his bare hands. But then, her voice echoed in his ears. "Because I'll be back, and I don't want to return to a pile of familiar corpses." He couldn't kill the freaks. She'd be back. But would she really? In the future, she could dress as she pleased, watch movies, make calls, drive anywhere she wanted. If she returned here, all she'd see was a violent, unhinged lunatic. Erik looked down at his hands, and suddenly, he went completely still. A strange, bone-deep calm washed over him. So chilling it made him shiver. He couldn't think his way to an answer, so he'd just have to ask her. She thought she could hide 6 feet underground and escape his questions? No. He'd dig up her coffin, pull out every nail, and face her in the grave. Face to face, skin to skin, and ask, "Are you really coming back?" With a complicated feeling, Polly searched the internet for more information about herself. Polly Clement. Perhaps because she was the first person in recorded history to open a haunted house attraction, her grave had become a popular destination for horror fans. One influencer even filmed a vlog, vividly reenacting the scene of her remains being stolen, narrating it as if they had witnessed the whole thing. That influencer even reached out to River's descendants, trying to learn the details of the court case. Naturally, they refused to talk. In this age of short videos, none of the vlogs were longer than 5 or 6 minutes. Polly quickly finished watching all the clips and fell into deep thought. In many Western cities, historical architecture was incredibly well preserved. A house might look brand new but could easily be over a century old. If internet influencers could find the traces of her former life, she could definitely find even more by going to New Orleans herself. Polly was always a woman of action. She immediately packed and headed out. She wasn't the type to abandon her work. Most of her roles were small supporting characters, so she simply talked to the producers and arranged to film all her scenes in one go. Half a month later, she boarded a flight to New Orleans, landing in the city of Kenner before taking a cab to her hotel. This trip, she was better prepared than she'd been for the camping trip. She brought everything she possibly could, especially pads and sports bras. If baggage limits weren't a thing, she would have brought dozens of pairs of sneakers. Kenner was very close to New Orleans. The moment Polly got into the cab, her heart started pounding wildly, as if something was tugging at her soul. She felt restless and anxious. More than 100 years had passed, but New Orleans had hardly changed. The muddy roads were now smooth asphalt, painted with white crosswalks. Perhaps they had just celebrated some local festival. Bright rainbow flags lined the old streets. The horse posts and carriages were gone, replaced with fire hydrants and traffic. Where men once smoked and chatted, now stood vibrant young women in colorful summer clothes, laughing with open mouths and bright teeth. The taxi stopped in front of the hotel. Polly paid the driver, hauled her suitcase inside, and checked in. After tossing her suitcase into the room, she went back outside. Back in the past, even dressed as a man, she would attract suspicious glances. Now, in shorts on a public street, no one gave her a second look. The contrast was subtle, but profound. She followed her memory and walked toward her old home. Many of the villas had been renovated. White buildings sat amid lush greenery, grand and stately. Halfway there, she saw Mitter's old residence. The brass plaque on the garden fence said the Mitter family had moved out of New Orleans in 1895. After several owners, it was now a private restaurant, and doing pretty well. Soon she arrived at her former villa. To her surprise, it looked almost exactly the same. Red brick walls, white pillars, carved balconies, a textbook Greek revival. The windows and doors were all shut tight, curtains drawn. It seemed uninhabited. She looked at the brass plaque on the fence. It said the house originally belonged to a cotton merchant, later rented by Polly Clement. After Clermont's death, the house was purchased by a mysterious businessman and had remained vacant ever since. Other homes had lengthy histories inscribed on their plaques, detailing every owner and their life stories. But for her home, just 2 or 3 lines? Polly frowned and pulled out her phone to search Polly Clermont House. These historic homes were all listed as tourist attractions online. As long as you searched, you could find user ratings and reviews. Hers had only 1 star. The most liked comment read, "I know you're all curious about Clermont's story, but don't. Go. My aunt is a medium, and she says the magnetic field near this house is terrible. Think about it. A woman who made it into the New York Times nearly became the most famous circus owner in the country, and then mysteriously dropped dead in her own bedroom, finally laid to rest, and then her grave was dug up. That kind of resentment? Off the charts. Bottom line, don't go. Especially if your personal aura is weak, you'll get haunted. You'll have endless nightmares." Polly. She hadn't haunted anyone in the past month. She'd been far too busy. But if multiple people were having hallucinations, did that mean something really was off about the house? Polly's heart skipped a beat. Erik had once renovated this house. There was a hidden entrance that led directly inside. The plaque said the house was purchased by a mysterious businessman and had remained empty ever since. Could that businessman have been Erik? Polly took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. She walked to the back of the villa and pushed aside a thick bush, revealing a rusty iron door. Only she and Erik knew how to open it. No key needed. Just press a certain spot with your thumb and simultaneously twist 2 gears using your index and ring fingers. Click. The door opened. Her palms were slick with cold sweat. She wiped her hands on her pants, turned on her phone flashlight, and descended the wooden ladder. She had never been so nervous. Her heart was pounding in her chest, echoing in her ears, blood rushing to her temples. Through a hidden passage, she pushed open a trapdoor. What greeted her was her bedroom. Nothing had changed. On the fireplace mantel, her dress for the next day was still hanging. But the fire had been out for over 100 years. So the mysterious businessman really was Erik. He must have established a trust or arranged for someone's descendants to maintain and preserve the house. Either way, the care he put into it overwhelmed her. She walked around the room. Even the wardrobe still held some of her clothes, though despite the best preservation efforts, some fabrics had yellowed. Polly was about to explore the other rooms when she suddenly froze. He had preserved the bedroom so perfectly. Was he trying to leave her a message? He knew she was from 100 years in the future. He knew she wanted to return to him. So he preserved the house just as it was, so that she would recognize it the moment she saw it again. Polly's heart ached with a sharp burn. If that were the case, had he left her any written message? She walked to the desk and tried to open the drawer. It was locked. She paused, reached under the desk and pressed a hidden latch. Click. The drawer popped open. Inside was a notebook. Polly picked it up and opened it. At the first page, her blood ran cold. August 10th. Replace bed with rosewood. Rosewood, naturally bug-resistant and moisture-proof. Erik had always wanted to make her a rosewood bed, but could never find the right wood. She died in February. August? That meant months had passed over there. But only about a month had passed in the modern day. Polly kept reading. September 1st. Replaced exterior wall with cypress. Page after page detailed how he had replaced the house's woodwork with solid mahogany. For some reason, it didn't feel like renovation. It felt like coffin construction. Why would he build a coffin? The answer was obvious. By mid-December, the renovations were complete, and he never wrote another word. Polly closed her eyes. Her heart felt like it was being sewn shut with a fine, burning needle. Just then, she felt a hot breath at her ear. It was as if someone was staring at her, breathing hard, each breath louder, rougher, more urgent. She snapped her eyes open and turned, nothing there. But she was certain someone had just been breathing in her ear. Could it be Erik? His ghost? Or had their timelines somehow overlapped? Polly didn't know much about physics, but she did know that time was irreversible in three-dimensional space. But in higher dimensions, like the fourth or fifth, time could bend. It could be crossed like a mountain range. Even general relativity hinted at this. Under special circumstances, time and space might curve. Past and future could overlap, which meant feeling Erik's breath in 2026 while he lived in 1889 was theoretically possible. Polly's breath caught. Goosebumps rose across her skin. She closed her eyes, trying to summon that feeling again. But it was like waking from a dream. You could never quite re-enter the same dream. Disappointment washed over her like a tide. She exhaled slowly and walked to the bed. But at that very moment, a powerful, terrifying gaze locked onto her. Someone was watching her. Polly's head snapped up. Nothing in sight, but the feeling of being stared at only grew stronger. Even without seeing his eyes, she could picture the look. Anguished, tortured, yet brimming with a terrifying hunger. The two timelines didn't flow at the same speed. Only seconds passed for her. But she felt like he had been watching her for hours. She closed her eyes and slowly exhaled. And then, she heard a voice at her ear. "Polly, is that you?" It was Erik's voice. Not his usual low, calm tone, but urgent, almost deranged. A madman's frantic whisper. Polly trembled. She turned sharply. No one behind her. Then she noticed the furniture was untouched, but the wallpaper looked new. Why replace the wallpaper? Was it part of the renovation? Or was he hiding something? She pulled a folding knife from her bag, knelt on the bed, and cut into the wallpaper. She gripped the edge and tore it down. Her scalp went numb. Underneath, wall to wall, was a single name. Polly, 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 Polly. Over and over and over. Erik no longer knew if he was hallucinating, or if Polly's shadow truly haunted him. That day, he went to the graveyard, dug up her coffin, brushed off the dirt, and opened the lid. The moment he saw her face, he shivered. It wasn't her. The features were the same, but she felt like a stranger. Maybe her soul had left the body. Still, he took the corpse home, just in case she needed a body to return to. But no matter what he did, it decayed. The face turned gray, then green. The skull peeked through. Maggots swelled between the jaws. He watched it all, coldly, and thought, if she woke up now with that face, that would be perfect. The circus freaks would recoil, abandon her, and he could lock her away. She would be his alone, to see, to kiss, to touch. But it was just a fantasy. She never came back. When the corpse turned to bone, he cleaned it up and burned the soiled mattress, replacing it with rosewood. That's when the hallucinations began. First, footsteps. Then, as he sat at the desk, he could feel someone standing beside him, flipping pages. Once, he even saw a faint, slender figure. He recognized her instantly. Polly. He stared, frozen, heart pounding, body shivering like he'd been thrown into icy water. It felt like his heart had been ripped from his chest and exposed to the cold. But the shadow vanished. In the year that followed, she appeared from time to time. Sometimes just a feeling. No sound, no sight, but as real as oxygen. sometimes a chill, racing over his skin, raising every hair. One night, he even felt her warmth. He lay in her bed, about to sleep, when the mattress dipped beside him. A warm pressure spread along the sheets. He knew it was her. His hand trembled. He sat up slowly, leaned in, and whispered, "Polly, is that you?" His voice cracked. Urgent, desperate. No reply. She vanished again. Maybe because he had failed to preserve her body, her soul had nowhere to rest and was cursed to wander, tormenting him. He hadn't seen her for too long. His boundaries kept slipping. At first, he wanted to own her, watch her every second. Now, he just wanted her to torment him. More often, every day. He started carving her name into the wall, every time she appeared. Before long, the wall was covered in Polly. It became a sickness. Her shadow was the only cure. Every time she appeared, the pain deepened, but so did the pleasure. But this cure was rare, elusive. Then one day, he woke up and felt nothing. The hole in his chest yawned wide. She was gone. No mirror needed. He knew his face must be twisted, unhinged. When she was near, he craved her scent like a starving beast. When she was gone, he went mad. Polly tore off another strip of wallpaper. Still her name. The entire wall was covered with her name. But looking closely, she realized the names hadn't all been carved on the same day. Why had Erik carved her name into the wall again and again? Staring at them, Polly could almost see him tossing and turning in this very bedroom, deranged, ecstatic, feverishly carving her name. She had taken her mother's surname. As a child, she used to complain about how many strokes it had. She often ran out of space in the writing grid when doing homework. But Erik, a complete beginner, had carved the character for Clement in a long, sharp, perfectly balanced form, as if he had practiced it hundreds, even thousands of times in secret. By the end, his writing grew messier, more frantic. Every line and curve pulsed with something terrifying. Not so much her name as a record of his unraveling sanity. Just looking at those carvings made Polly's eyes feel like they were burning. She couldn't take it anymore and decided to check the other rooms. She remembered that Maribel had kept a diary. If the rest of the house had been preserved as carefully as the master bedroom, she might find Maribel's journal and finally learn what had happened after her death. Sometimes Polly would visit Maribel's room and chat with her and Flora. Maribel was open and direct, never shy about journaling in front of others. Once, after a fight with Emily, she had even shoved the diary into Polly's hands, demanding she read the entry and judge who was in the wrong. Polly walked into Maribel's room and went straight to the side of the bed. She found a loose floorboard, pried it up, and there it was, a diary. She whispered a quiet sorry to Maribel in her heart, took out the journal, and sat at the desk, flipping it open. She skipped over the entries before 1889 and turned straight to the ones written after her death. February 23, 1889. Miss Clement has passed away. We still can't believe it. Flora's been crying nonstop. Emily fainted. Theodore is pale and trembling. Rivers has been smoking and pacing the living room, constantly glancing upstairs as if he wants to rush up and see for himself. I cried hard too, barely managing to hold Rivers back. He whispered through clenched teeth, "It had to be him. You're all too scared to confront him." "Fine, I'll do it myself." His eyes were red, the first time I'd ever seen them like that in public. We all talked him down in the end. We really couldn't confront him. Even though Miss Clement told us to follow Mr. Erik's orders after she was gone, his eyes were just terrifying. The kind you only see on murderers. February 27th, 1889. We tried to arrange a burial for Miss Clement. Her body had been in the house too long. It would start to rot if left any longer. But Mr. Erik drove us out. Well, not drove. He was actually very polite. But we were so afraid of him, we trembled just standing in front of him. He said, "Don't move her. She'll come back." Then he sat by her corpse, held her hand, and rested his forehead on the back of it. The sight terrified us, but it also proved he hadn't killed her. Theodore had been in love with her. Rivers had feelings he couldn't even put into words. But even they wouldn't dare hold a corpse like that. She must have died of natural causes. God, why would you take such a good person so soon? March 2nd, 1889. The body's starting to smell. You can smell it from the hallway outside the bedroom. We have to do something. March 3rd, 1889. We started a rumor, said someone had seen Miss Clement's ghost on the outskirts of town. Desperate people cling to hope. Sure enough, Mr. Erik heard and rushed off to investigate. Before leaving, he warned us not to go near the bedroom, or he'd kill us all. The others were terrified and asked me what to do. I was scared too, but I touched the silver ring she once tied around my finger and managed to steady myself. I said, "Don't worry, Miss Clement will protect us." We buried her quickly, afraid he'd come back and take the body. I held the lace she tied for me and listened to the priest's eulogy. Then I broke down crying. She once said I was strong, that I never gave up. She was wrong. I wasn't strong. I cried into my mother's skirt every night. My big feet made me slow and mocked by others. Mother gave me my first life. Miss Clement gave me my second. Now, they're both gone. March 4th, 1889. Her corpse was stolen. All of New Orleans is talking about it. March 5th, 1889, as expected. It was Mr. Erik. We think he's gone insane. Wants to live with her corpse. But no one dares stop him. We've only seen him once, since then. His eyes are bloodshot, but his gaze is terrifyingly bright, like he's lost his mind. He looks like those gamblers who think they're about to win it all. He really believes she'll come back. Into that rotting body. March 9th, 1889, Mr. Erik called a meeting, said the circus would continue. No one dared oppose him. April 20th, 1889. He's more talented than we imagined. Under his leadership, the circus quickly recovered its old glory. The darkness of her death seems to be fading. Only he seems trapped. By day, he commands us calmly. By night, he returns to the bedroom to share the room with her corpse. Aside from love, I can think of no other reason he treasures a rotting body so dearly. July 15th, 1889. Summer's here. The whole house reeks. Eating inside is becoming unbearable. Mrs. Freeman bought sprays and deodorizers, but the stench returns within a day, seeping into every wall. August 10th, 1889. He seems to have come to his senses. Finally packed up her remains, just bones by now, and threw out the soaked mattress. We silently prayed this meant a fresh start. August 15th, 1889 spoke too soon. Putting away her bones was just the beginning of his breakdown. Now he stares at a spot in the room all day, unmoving. Flora asked me last night if he had fallen in love with someone else, and if he'd kill them if he had. I asked why. She said he's been whispering a strange name at night. It sounds like Miss Clement, but the pronunciation is completely different. She tried to mimic it. I told her, that is Miss Clement's name. If he could fall for someone else, would he have lived with a corpse for 6 months? Flora looked relieved. She didn't care if he loved her forever. She just didn't want to die. As long as he still loves Miss Clement, our lives are safe. September 20th, 1889, he's worse. Now he stares at that same spot even at night. No sleep at all. None of us knows what he's looking at. The entire house feels haunted. Today he gasped, eyes fixed on the air, and whispered a name. Polly. Should have known. He was looking at her. September 29th, 1889, he's mad. Truly mad. He doesn't sleep. His eyes are bloodshot. Even while trembling, face twitching, he gives us perfect commands. Cold, calculated. We obey without question. With Miss Clement gone, if he snaps and decides to kill us, no one can stop him. October 3rd, 1889. How mad has he gone? He started drawing symbols on the walls. One whole wall, covered in eerie markings. December 20th, 1889, Flora said he's talking nonsense now. I asked what she meant. She said she passed by the bedroom door and saw him looking at a notebook. Face lit up with crazed joy. He kept whispering that he finally knew why Polly hadn't returned. Because the story hadn't begun yet. If he stayed in New Orleans and didn't go to Paris, she couldn't find him. No one knew what he meant. He really might have lost it. January 1st, 1890, first day of the new year. We're going to Paris. Goodbye, New Orleans. Goodbye, Miss Clement. I'll miss you forever. Polly closed the diary, her heart trembling like an earthquake. Maribel hadn't understood Erik's words, but Polly did. Erik had realized he was a character in a film, and that he might have discovered how to bring her back. If, when she was in the bedroom, she could feel his breath from 1889. Then the two timelines must have overlapped. Whether or not he went to Paris was a critical event, one that could affect both timelines. No wonder she couldn't find the horror version of the Phantom of the Opera after returning to the modern world. Because Erik hadn't gone to Paris yet. In simple terms, this was like Schrodinger's cat. Until you opened the box, the cat was both alive and dead. The horror version of Phantom meant the cat was alive. But if she couldn't find it, either the cat was dead, Erik chose not to go to Paris, or the box hadn't been opened yet. To find the movie online, Erik would have to go to Paris, become the Phantom, let the story unfold. But even that wasn't enough. Like the cat in the box, if the box isn't opened, the cat's fate remains unknown. Polly had to find this diary to confirm Erik had indeed gone to Paris. Only then would the box truly open. Which meant she could now find the horror film version online. Parallel timelines, multiverses. These theories only gained traction in recent years. Polly couldn't imagine what kind of mental state Erik had been in to figure all this out on his own. The diary said he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were constantly bloodshot. Maybe he never really believed in parallel universes. Maybe he just needed a reason to keep living. Polly took a deep breath, pulled out her phone, and unlocked it. Her vision blurred with heat. She couldn't tell if it was from the emotional impact of the diary or the excitement of seeing him again. She opened the video app, searched The Phantom of the Opera. The classic version appeared first. Then, just below it, the horror film version. Her heart leapt. She couldn't hear anything. The world went silent. Wind, voices, traffic, gone. Her thumb trembled. She tapped play. The screen went black. Buffering? Or did the source fail? 2 seconds later, the familiar overture began. The screen showed the lavish golden interior of the Paris Opera House. Ah, it had just been loading. Polly's back went cold with sweat. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand and sat on the couch. 10 minutes passed. Surely, it would work now? She glanced around. Everything looked the same. She walked to the window, pulled back the curtain. The sky had darkened. Nothing outside looked different. Still the quiet, tree-lined path. Then, Polly's eyes went wide. A lamplighter appeared, climbing a ladder, lighting a gas street lamp. She had really returned to the 19th century. Polly's first instinct was to grab her phone and shut off the movie, terrified she might accidentally travel back again. The time flow between the two worlds was completely different. If she got pulled back, even if she managed to return again, it might be several months later here. She couldn't take that risk. First things first, she had to find Erik. She looked down and realized she was still wearing denim shorts and white sneakers. Scratch that. First things first was finding a normal outfit. Her body in the 19th century had been malnourished. She'd only just managed to reach 5'3". But her real body was 5'9". She wasn't even sure if her old clothes would still fit. As she headed upstairs, she felt a twinge of regret for leaving that massive suitcase behind at the hotel. If she had known, she would have lugged it back to the villa. The bedroom on the second floor was locked. Polly opened the secret passage and went straight for the wardrobe. Sure enough, none of her old clothes fit. She tried on two and nearly suffocated before giving up. Thankfully, Erik's clothes were still there. Shirts, coats, cufflinks, ties, pants, everything. She slipped into one of his white dress shirts. The faint, familiar scent on the collar hit her, clean and subtle, and suddenly her nose stung. To her, it had only been a little over a month apart. A sweet little separation. But Erik had waited nearly a year. From February 1889 to January 1890. Over 300 days of torment and madness. She pulled out his black coat, hugged it to her chest, buried her face in the fabric, and inhaled deeply. She had always wondered why Erik was so obsessed with her scent, like he could never get enough of it. Now she understood. When love runs that deep, a person can crave another's scent with an almost unbearable hunger. If Erik were here, she would hug him too, bury her nose in his neck and breathe him in. But he wasn't. He was in Paris. Polly pulled herself together quickly. One of her strengths was her ability to instantly shut down all negative emotions. It was that very trait that helped her take down Mrs. Merlin and escape the cellar. She shook off the sorrow, threw on Erik's coat, and pulled on an old pair of her slacks. Though the pant legs were a little short, thankfully they still fit. In front of the full-length mirror, she tucked in the shirt and put on a Panama hat. From a distance, she looked even more like a refined, elegant gentleman than before. She didn't have her suitcase, but she still had her leather tote. spacious enough to carry a lot. The only downside was that it wasn't as rugged or cut-proof as a hiking backpack. Anyone could easily see what was inside. Polly silently prayed Erik hadn't taken all his weapons with him. Otherwise, traveling to Paris unarmed might end with her being robbed before she even stepped off the boat. Intentional or not, Erik had left a small pistol in the wardrobe drawer. The chamber was full, 6 bullets total. It was almost like he knew she'd need it. With mixed feelings, Polly slipped the pistol into her coat. Inside the bedroom's safe, Erik had left a black leather wallet. She opened it to find US dollars and French francs. Everything from tiny nickel and copper coins to large $1,000 bonds and 1,000 franc notes. Tucked into one of the slots were several gold louis coins, each worth about 20 francs. Her emotions grew even more tangled. Not only had he left her a fat wad of cash, he'd also prepared small change. If she only had large bills, she might have drawn the wrong kind of attention while trying to exchange them at a bank. But he had thought of that too. How many times must he have imagined her return, rehearsed it in his mind again and again, to prepare down to this level of detail? Polly didn't dislike the modern world. Like most people, she never truly believed in fairy tales like love conquers all. During her month back, she had hesitated too. Did she really want to go back? Staying in the modern world meant becoming a normal person, losing her lover, losing her career, but gaining safety and convenience. Yet Maribel's diary had made up her mind for her. She had to admit, the thing that moved her most wasn't love itself. It was being needed. Erik craved her, needed her, couldn't live without her. From childhood to adulthood, Polly's emotional experiences had always been lukewarm. Gentle but distant love from her parents, ordinary friendships, flat romances. Modern society seemed obsessed with boundaries. Even between close friends and family, people always left room to retreat. But Polly wanted something intense, something all-consuming, something that could devour her. Before, she could only find that feeling in fictional worlds. Now that Erik could give her that for real, why keep clinging to fantasy? She checked the clock, 7:30 p.m. She didn't want to go out at night. It was too risky. She decided to sleep here tonight and leave in the morning. The villa had been vacant for too long. The water tanks hadn't been cleaned. When she turned on the tap, the water ran yellow and foul. The gas was off too. No gas light. There was a matchbox on the nightstand. She thought about lighting a candle, but changed her mind. She didn't want to alert the neighbors. She and her past body looked almost identical. If someone saw her wandering around, they might think she was a ghost and spread rumors. If that happened, she wouldn't even be able to buy a boat ticket without getting chased out of town. No need to stir up trouble. Polly pulled the dust cover off the bed and settled in for the night. The next morning, she was jolted awake by church bells. Bleary-eyed, she checked the time, 6 a.m. Back in the modern world, she had fallen back into the habit of sleeping late. Waking up this early left her dazed and groggy. It took a while before she remembered. She was back in the 19th century. She washed up with bottled water, pulled on Erik's black coat, tucked the pistol into the inner pocket, donned her stiff-brimmed hat, grabbed her tote bag, and slipped out the secret door. Along the way, she kept the hat brim low. Fortunately, the people out this early were all laborers on their way to work, bonnet-haired, sore-limbed, and too exhausted to care about her face. Just like that, Polly made it to the docks. Luck was on her side. There was a passenger ship about to set sail for Paris. The captain was loudly recruiting passengers from the pier. Polly ducked her head, blended into the crowd, bought a second-class ticket, and slipped a few extra coins to a crewman, asking him to arrange a private cabin. The crewman gave her a knowing nod and waved her aboard. Everything went so smoothly, it almost felt unreal. Polly stepped into the second-class cabin and found it quite decent. There was a wardrobe, a wash basin, a toilet, and sunlight streaming through the porthole. She had originally thought of buying a first-class ticket, but most first-class passengers traveled with trunks and servants. Showing up alone would have been far too conspicuous. Better to stay low-key. Suddenly, the departure bell rang. The steam whistle blasted through the sky, and the ship slowly pulled away from the dock. Life aboard was more grueling than Polly expected. She had no concept of 19th century steamships, and was still thinking with a modern mindset, assuming the trip would take 2 or 3 days tops. In the end, she spent an entire month on that ship. She asked a crewman and found out, under normal conditions, it should only take 2 weeks. But the captain was greedy, and kept stopping at every port for 2 days to pick up more passengers. Polly. No wonder it had felt so lucky that a ship was departing the moment she arrived. The captain had basically been waiting for her. By the end of the month, she was sick of everything and just wanted to get off that cursed ship. Once they reached a French port, she still had to take a train to get to Paris. Technically, she could sail straight into Paris via the Seine, but after a month at sea, she was sick of boats. Land it was. Unfortunately, trains weren't exactly convenient either. At 1 p.m., her train got delayed. An hour later, it finally crawled into the station. If Erik had a phone, she probably would have sent him 1,000 passive-aggressive texts by now. Transportation in this era was killing her. This time, Polly didn't hold back. She bought a first-class ticket. The first-class cabin was as fancy as a luxury bedroom. The floor was covered in a red and gold carpet, furniture made of mahogany, with fine tapestries, oil paintings, folding screens, and porcelain vases. She ordered a bowl of chocolate ice cream and a plate of roasted lamb. Her sour mood finally began to lift. Outside the window, the scenery kept changing. The sky darkened, and the lonely countryside gave way to signs of civilization. Oddly, when the train reached Paris, hardly anyone got off. The station itself seemed eerily quiet. Polly checked the clock on the platform, 6 p.m. Strange. Back in New Orleans, 6 p.m. was bustling. And Paris, the world-famous city, should have been even more lively. She stepped outside and tried to flag a cab. But the driver didn't even look at her, just sped off. Polly was confused. She tried again. Same thing. The drivers completely ignored her. One of them even splashed her pants with mud. She stood there, dumbfounded. Night was falling fast. She didn't want to sleep near the station. She spotted a coffee stand nearby and hurried over. The vendor glanced at her. "We're out of coffee." "I know," Polly said. "I just wanted to ask, why are none of the cab drivers picking up passengers?" The vendor licked his lips and chuckled. First time in Paris? Polly noticed some shady men had been following her since she stepped off the train, drawn by her first-class appearance. She casually replied, "Yeah. Lost a ton of money betting on horses. Came to Paris to stay with relatives." Immediately, the dangerous stares from the shadows vanished. The vendor snorted. "Then you picked a bad time. Paris is haunted. People are scared out of their minds. Someone dies every few nights come sunset. Everyone bolts their doors. Streets go empty. If you're not keen on dying, you can rent a carriage and drive yourself into town." The moment she heard the word haunted, Polly's heart leapt. She thought she'd be too exhausted to feel anything after this nightmare journey. But just hearing that word made her blood rush and her breath quicken. She missed Erik so badly it hurt. It had been over 2 months since she last saw him. She missed him so much she wanted to bite him, leave a deep, sharp mark on his neck. Polly steadied her breath, crossed the street to the carriage rental stand, and rented a 2-wheeled open top buggy. Inside, she found a newspaper. She wasn't sure if the last renter had left it there or if the rental shop provided it. She opened it and saw a massive headline. "City Hall orders citizens to stay indoors after dark." She frowned and looked at the top right corner of the page, then froze. It wasn't 1890 anymore. The date on the paper said 1892. She'd only been back in the modern world for a little over a month. But here, 3 whole years had passed. Polly steadied herself and kept reading the newspaper. Recently, the city government has issued a strict advisory, urging citizens to avoid going out at night in light of a string of violent incidents. That was the only line, cryptic and lacking detail. Polly asked the carriage rental owner for more recent newspapers, skimmed through them quickly, and finally pieced together the full story. It all started in 1890, when the famous opera singer Carlotta received an anonymous letter of threat. The letter, written in red ink, warned that if she dared to take the stage, disaster would strike. Carlotta was a seasoned diva, no stranger to hate mail, and dismissed it without a second thought. She went on stage as usual the next night. That night marked the beginning of Paris's nightmare. During her performance, halfway through a solo, the theater lights abruptly went out. A single spotlight snapped on, illuminating the center of the stage. At first, the audience thought it was part of the act, eagerly anticipating what would come next, until a piercing scream echoed from backstage, and a spray of blood splattered the spotlight filter, dyeing the beam a horrifying crimson. The next moment, a blood-soaked corpse fell from above, swinging violently under the spotlight. Women in the front row fainted instantly. The body was horrifically mutilated, chest torn open, guts and blood gushing like a waterfall. Carlotta, closest to the corpse, rolled her eyes back and passed out cold. According to witnesses, just as the audience was about to panic and scramble for the exits, a chilling voice boomed, "Don't move." No one could explain it, but the voice seemed to whisper directly into their ears. Everyone froze. Then a tall, terrifying figure emerged from the darkness. Without a word, he grabbed each person by the jaw, inspecting their faces one by one. No one knew what he was looking for. Everyone was paralyzed with fear. After an hour of this silent scrutiny, the man finally allowed them to leave the opera house. The next day, the police announced that the corpse had only been a hyper-realistic prop, and the lighting technician had simply been knocked unconscious backstage. No actual bloodshed had occurred. But nearly every audience member claimed they had smelled fresh blood and heard blood-curdling screams. The police had no explanation. The Paris Opera House was forced to suspend all performances. Carlotta, upon waking, fled Paris and never returned. During the Opera House's closure, the city of Paris experienced its most peaceful weeks in recent memory. But while the city rested, theater managers were in crisis. No shows meant no income, so they bribed the police to allow performances to resume. 2 months later, the public had largely forgotten the ghost incident and began returning to the Opera House. That's when a new young soprano received another threatening letter. It warned that if she took the stage, she'd end up just like Carlotta. Polly nearly spat out her drink when she saw the name, Christine Day, the original female lead from The Phantom of the Opera. Christine's father had been a gifted village violinist. She received formal musical training from a young age and met Viscount Raoul de Chagny as childhood sweethearts. In the original novel, Erik tried to kill the Viscount several times, all because of Christine. And now he was sending Christine a threat letter? Polly. Was this just because Carlotta ran away and he needed someone else to threaten? She sighed and kept reading. Christine, while gentle and innocent, had a strong will. She refused to back down. That night, she performed as planned. Surprisingly, nothing happened. The show was a roaring success. Overjoyed, she returned to her dressing room and embraced her lover, Viscount de Chagny. Suddenly, a gloved hand appeared from nowhere and gripped the Viscount's throat. The Viscount, a graduate of the Naval Academy and a seasoned world traveler, was in decent shape. But that hand gripped his throat with inhuman strength, like it could twist his head off with ease. Later, Christine recounted the incident to reporters, still visibly shaken. "Reporter, you had the most successful performance of your career. All of Paris is talking about your voice. Why do? You think he attacked your suitor? Was it jealousy? Was he trying to extort you?" Christine, "I don't know. He didn't speak to us at all. I was terrified. I thought he would actually kill someone." Reporter, "Are you sure he didn't say a single word to you?" Christine, "He did, but it didn't feel like he was talking to us. More like he was talking to himself." Reporter, "What did he say?" Christine, "He said, 'If I kill you, will she be able to see me?'" Reporter, "Who do you think this she is?" Christine, "I don't know. I really don't know. Other girls at the theater say he's looking for someone. Whoever it is, I hope he finds her and stops killing." That was the end of the interview. The newspaper gave it a dramatic headline: "Terror in the dressing room. Opera ghost strikes. Again? Driven by jealousy?" Polly. So the plot somehow managed to stay on track. Had it ended there, the rumors wouldn't have reached every corner of Paris. But days later, another journalist broke the news. Christine and the Viscount were secretly engaged. A village violinist's daughter, engaged to a noble Viscount? His family would never allow it. Some claimed the opera ghost leaked the story to steal Christine away, enchanted by her voice. Others insisted he had fallen in love with her, and that's why he didn't sabotage her performance. Regardless, the news spread like wildfire. Everyone in Paris believed the opera ghost was real. Eventually, the Viscount eloped with Christine. But the ghost's legend only grew. In the past 2 months alone, nearly every week a fresh corpse would appear at the opera house's entrance, gutted, bloodied, intestines spilling out. The horror became so severe that the city government had to act, urging citizens to stay indoors at night. The story wasn't just in every Paris paper. It spread to neighboring provinces. Soon, all of France knew there was a ghost haunting the Paris Opera House. Polly read with a complex mix of emotions, as if swallowing a cold, heavy stone. Erik had done everything he could to make sure she saw him. He even considered killing Raoul to get her attention. But in the end, he couldn't go through with it. Maybe he feared changing the plot too much, feared she wouldn't be able to return. Maybe he even helped Christine and the Viscount elope, because it was the final scene of the original novel. And when he saw she still hadn't returned, what had he thought then? Did he believe she had abandoned him? Is that when he began his rampage in Paris? Polly looked back at the newspaper. It said the first corpse had been a hyper-realistic prop, but most citizens didn't buy it. Many suspected the police were covering for the ghost. Polly figured the recent corpses were probably props too, like the ones he had crafted for her haunted house attraction. If they were real, the police would have issued a warrant by now. Still, if she didn't show up soon, the fake bodies might start becoming real ones. Polly returned the newspaper to the carriage rental owner and bought a map. According to it, the opera house was just a few kilometers from the train station. Without hesitation, she hopped into her carriage, flicked the reins, and sped toward the Paris Opera House. By dusk, the streets were deserted. Only the sound of hooves and wheels echoed through the empty boulevards. The closer she got to the opera house, the faster her heart pounded. Her palms were slick with sweat, and she nearly dropped the reins. Her legs felt weak, like all the blood had rushed to her head. She bit her hand hard. Only then could she steady her breathing. What shocked her most was the line of carriages outside the opera house, stretching for blocks. Yet the crowd was dead silent. No chatter, only the sound of shallow breathing. Polly looked around. Everyone was dressed in elaborate costumes. It was a masquerade ball. Some came as Lucy, some as Eros and Psyche from Greek myth. One person had painted themselves gold, trying to resemble a candelabrum. It should have been a festive scene, but everyone was pale, solemn, and deathly quiet. They looked less like partygoers and more like mourners. The masquerade was from the original story too, but even Polly, who had read the novel, seen the musical, and watched the horror film, couldn't guess why the opera house would hold a masquerade now. Hadn't the government warned everyone to stay indoors at night? Why would these people dare to come? She followed the line of carriages forward, eventually arriving at the opera house entrance. She dismounted and followed the flow of people into the grand hall. The richly dressed gentlemen and ladies were all silent and ashen-faced. In the corner, a woman was angrily whispering to a man beside her. "What's the deal with this ghost? Why won't the police arrest him?" "Darling, please keep your voice down," the man pleaded. "You saw it yourself. Every time there's a murder, the police call it a prop. Who knows what kind of spell he has on the police chief? This crowd is full of nobles and dignitaries. Are you telling me they've all been blackmailed? Shh. Look, he knows everything. Even that, who knows? Who made a deal with him behind closed doors?" The rest of their whispers faded into the background. Polly thought for a moment, and it all made sense. Erik had blackmailed these people using their secrets. They were all high society elites. Even if coerced, they couldn't risk the scandal. Forced to attend, they eyed one another with suspicion, convinced the opera ghost had informants among them. That's how so many secrets had leaked. Polly had to admit, Erik's intellect was terrifying. His fake corpses not only avoided police attention, but also discredited the police and made it seem like they were in on it. Without that illusion, these people might never have obeyed him. But even more frightening was the sense that Erik's patience was running out. Gathering this many people in one place was dangerous. One misstep could spark a deadly backlash. Unless he had a truly terrifying trump card, something that made disobedience unthinkable. Almost instantly, Polly thought of the dynamite buried beneath the opera house. Cold sweat poured down her spine. He wouldn't, right? Just then, a staff member in uniform stepped forward and announced in a trembling voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, the masquerade ball is about to begin. This way, please." In the deathly silence, Polly stepped forward, trying to walk past him. The staffer blocked her path. "Sir, please tell us who you're dressed as." Polly paused, then removed her Panama hat, revealing her sleek black hair. For the first time in a month, she let someone see her uncovered. "Polly Clement," she said calmly. "I'm dressed as Polly Clement." The staffer's face drained of color. His teeth chattered as he stammered, "Why, you can't dress as Miss Clement." Polly asked, "Why not?" The man stuttered, unable to answer. He turned and hurried into the grand hall. 2 minutes later, a young woman emerged, tall and slender, with slightly bowed knees and a round, warm face like a ripe persimmon. Polly recognized her instantly. It was Flora, all grown up. Flora looked annoyed, clearly distracted, until she saw Polly. Her eyes widened. Polly smiled gently. "Flora, it's been a long time." If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Nuevi Story. Thanks for listening.